Hi, welcome everybody. I hope you guys are staying healthy and safe in whatever part of the world you are in. Welcome to our next episode of Future of GBS. And today's discussion, again, is a very interesting topic. We're going to be debating on the cost versus revenue-centric approach of GBS. Now, many of you who've been involved in this space for more than 2 decades and going back to the start of the shared services journey would remember that it started out ideally as an opportunity, a strategy where companies could take advantage of large talent pools in lower cost countries who could potentially do the same job as in the higher cost country due to the advances made in communication and technology landscape. That narrative continued for the next 2.5 decades, where majority of the shared services have been set up on the pretext of costs arbitrage, labor arbitrage, and they have remained cost-centric. What we interestingly find is over the last few years that the leadership is demanding more from the shared services in terms of going beyond the cost centricity and look at other aspects, including revenue-centered approach. And some of the companies have been able to leapfrog and get into this space, and they have been able to extract, unleash an oversized rewards on being not only cost-centric, but also take on some of the revenue-centric approaches. And this has led to essentially 4 key changes in the way shared services are managed. The first one is the GBS leadership is a lot more respected by the senior leadership in terms of decision making, in terms of critical strategy of the businesses, etc. The second one is the pressure to reduce costs has gone down a bit because there are plenty of opportunities that are coming through the revenue-centric approach. Third, there's a lot more digital and technology adoption. And last but not the least, talent has been key in this journey for the revenue-centric shared services. And many of these guys have now been considered as part of the talent hub and they regularly get promoted to the business side of an organization. So ladies and gentlemen, today's topic is going to be, should the Next-Gen GBS be revenue-centric over cost-centric, or should it continue the journey or a hybrid? And today I've been joined by 3 esteemed panelists from all across the globe for this episode. So let me introduce you to Tim Palmer, Philip Woodburn, and Dean Smith. I'll start with Tim's introduction. Tim.
Oh, hello, everyone. I have worked in GBS and outsourcing for 32 years. It seems amazing. But the last 10 years, I've been working with amazing colleagues in Novartis, building a services organization really that serves the front office of the company. It's part of our GBS, so it's part of what we call customer and technology services. That's the Novartis GBS organization. That itself is about a 13,000 person team. And the bit that I focus on is the front office services. You could call it revenue centric. We don't, but you could call it revenue centric. So it's serving the sales and marketing scientific communities within our organization. That's got about 3,500 people providing front office services to the rest of the organization, including R&D and commercial teams. And we work for all of the business units across the company.
Brilliant. And I'm sure you have lots of stories to share with our people today. Let's go to Philip Woodburn.
Good day to everybody. Nice to meet you virtually. I've spent between 2006 and 2018 about 12 years, first of all, being part of a big SAP global system, build as finance lead on that project. And then the 9 years after that, establishing and then running our shared services in finance, first of all in Asia and then more globally. We in Schneider have shared services in different areas of the business, in finance, in HR, in IT. They do all still report vertically through to the different global leads of those organizations, but there's a strong link between all of them. Many of them are located in the same countries and in the same cities. I speak particularly of our setups in India, in China, in North America. And then 3.5 years ago, I stepped out of this shared services journey into a part of the business that's really close to the front office. I today work in what we call solution risk management, and I run a specialist team that helps to drive the risk assessment prior to submitting customer bids on large global projects for what we call our energy management business. And it's fun, and it's really showed me a lot of new opportunities and new ideas and new thoughts about how, with the right setup, shared services could really drive further its contribution towards the revenue generation side of the business. Thank you, Anirvan.
Wonderful. And we know that you're based in Singapore. So you're joining in. It's quite late in the evening for you, but welcome and for joining our session today. Now let's move to Dean from sunny Barcelona.
Hello all, and welcome. Yeah, based in Barcelona, but you can tell by the accent that I'm from the UK. Previously, before Barcelona, in Malaysia. I'm CEO of Assuring Business. We're an independent advisory, consulting, and virtual leadership resource team. We provide a number of resource inputs to organizations, including shared services. My background includes various shared services leadership roles, originally in revenue assurance and fraud for the telco space. More recently, last 8 years or so, has been insurance, but also some more telco. And on that shared services side, the insurance piece was for Zurich Insurance globally. Finance operations, we had a global footprint, 22 different countries, of which 12 were participating in the shared service model. And we had a number of offshoring centers as well as some onshoring opportunities there as well. And latterly, responsible for a telecoms company in Spain for the customer front end, everything post-acquisition in terms of customer support, technical support, and collections and revenue and growth and so on.
Excellent. Thank you, Dean. And let's start the discussion. Now, before we do that, and we're going to start first with Tim. Quickly, for those of you who are watching us through LinkedIn Live or YouTube Live, if you have any questions for our panelists, please post them there. We've got a moderator who will pick up the questions and relay the questions to this platform. If you're looking at the episodes post the actual event, then just email the questions. We'll pick it up and we'll share it with our panelists. And as you know, this program is brought to you by Fifth Chrome, and it's being powered by Roundtable Insights. With that, Tim, what's your take on the topic?
Well, look, I've spent the last 10 years pretty much exclusively building services that you could, if using the definition that you've shared, is revenue-centric. So I am going to, of course, say that Next-Gen GBS should address revenue generation or business performance topics. And I can go through a little bit later some of the services that we provide. But I think it must be both cost and revenue, and not just one or the other. And of course, it needs to be cost-centric first, because you earn your right. We earn our right to be in the company, to operate by getting the basics right. But that said, I can see the value, having worked in this space for 10 years now, I can see the value that it brings. The shared services, global sourcing and service management principles that I learned doing outsourcing back in the early 90s, they work well with this scope. Having service definitions, being clear on how you're going to do something, having controls built in. These are things that apply just as much to a commercial service as they do to a finance service. It is different though. You know, when we're doing our prioritization, we don't talk about revenue so much, but we talk about business value. And business value, we make decisions on what's the most value to the company, rather than will we save money. Now, cost savings is a value driver, but so also is, are we doing the right thing to help the company achieve its goals? you can't do just that stuff at the expense of the other stuff, the productivity, the simplification, and the quality. And in our organization, we talk about this as polarities that we have to master. So we have to master innovation and operational excellence, and customer intimacy and enterprise scale. And so the way we approach things, we are trying to deal with those two things, which can be opposites, but also can work together. And at a CTS level for the company, we talk about fourth generation global business services. And this is a services organization that's proactively looking for, finding, and then helping to solve business problems using all of the assets that we've got available within our CTS organization. And we're working through a common business partnering team to help find the areas where we as CTS can have the biggest impact. And we don't see many shared services organizations doing similar things at scale. Anyone that's listening that is, I would really love to hear from you, because we would love to do some benchmarking on this topic.
Brilliant. And I'll come back to you to understand the genesis of where it all started, this journey of being more revenue-centric or frontline or front office based. Philippe, what's your take on the topic?
Well, I think the first thing I can really say is it's not a new subject. Even back in those days when I was involved directly in financial shared services, people were talking about how do we move up the value chain? How can we bring more value to the business? Yes, we're really focused on how we can optimize costs, and Tim's talked a little bit about some of the essential attributes of that. And the thing that I really loved about the shared services space was the young people that you had in this space, and the passion that those young people had, and the drive that they had to want to go further and want to do more. And often it was more the reticence of management that would prevent them from doing so. But I think what we really need to think about is, if we come back to the basics of business again, and I'm putting my finance hat a little bit on here, on the one side, we don't incur costs generally without thinking about where it's going to produce a stream of revenue, right? Whether we're talking about investing in R&D, or we're talking about incurring commercial costs to develop business channels. That's on the one side. And on the other side, how can we talk about revenue without talking about the costs that need to match against that revenue? Otherwise, how do we measure our performance and profitability? So really, in a nutshell, for me, you can't separate them. It's about both. And I think the future is really driving us towards looking at both. And I see a lot of capability in teams that I know, whether today or before, running shared services, and their ability really to play in both areas. So I would say it's both.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dean, you have both a shared services background, but as well as in the commercial leadership space. What's your take?
Well, look, I have to fully support what Tim and Philip have said. It's really about the balancing act between what the business needs are at that time. So if I were to put it in one sentence, I'd probably say the focus really should be on what the business needs at that point in their strategic journey. So yeah, and that can change. 1 year it could be more revenue centric, and another year more cost centric. And this happens quite a lot in the businesses I've been involved with. I know the global shared services model was originated on a cost basis business case. But as time goes on, as everybody does, they improve the value proposition from the shared services model, and you really push hard to make that more revenue and business centric. So adding customer value, adding intelligence to the whole business process, continuous operational excellence to improve things, and so on. And I think, again, what Philip and Tim have both said, it's about that whole picture over time. So for me, it's really about where you are in your business journey as to what's most important for the emphasis at that point. But the teams need to be capable of adapting and prioritizing based on those needs. And clearly not just responding to what the business says. It's really about being involved in those business decisions and being able to add value to the journey, because I think most shared services organizations, if they're doing the job right, they're going to see an awful lot of intelligence that will add value to those business decisions, and therefore be able to contribute to the strategy from all sorts of angles. You know, the customer perspective, the process efficiency perspective, the things that go wrong, and root cause analysis, all those different things. The GBS is going to be really well positioned to give a great perspective on and drive decisioning. So if they're not involved in that decisioning process, then there's something wrong at the top level of the organization. I think they need to be an active member of the team and be pulled in. But if you're not being pulled in, then get yourself pushed in, because I think there's an important value add from that center of excellence model that you just get naturally by being involved in the day-to-day processes of the business.
Brilliant, Dean. Tim, I know I saw you nodding your head with what Dean was saying. So maybe you can reflect upon what got said by Philippe and Dean, but at the same time, also let's talk about the genesis of how you guys went about your move from, in addition to cost-centric approach, also sort of front office approach. Yeah.
Well, hey, it's funny. I think it's actually around about exactly 10 years ago that I accepted the job to come here to build, to Novartis, to build a shared service organization. And one of the reasons I was attracted to it was because they said, let's do this properly and well. And the driver actually was a change in the industry that was leading to a different go-to-market model. And therefore, you know, we could build new capabilities all over the place in different product groups, or we could build them in some sort of center of expertise and center of scale type model. And what we did was, that's exactly what we went and did. We started, actually, the first shared services were really sales and marketing related shared services. So, you know, the genesis was supporting a business change and going from there. If I could just tell a little story about the services that we provide, I think it will bring some of it to life. So, you know, the very first thing that we did was we started with a data and analytics set of services and some delivery out of Hyderabad. And we codified that into a set of services, which themselves have grown, obviously, over the last 10 years enormously and have changed in nature enormously because of the progress that's been made in data and analytics in the intervening period. But it made sense to take the existing small capabilities that there were and then build on that to build the rest of the capability. And what we added to that over time, so into an initial analytics service, we added insights, including forecasting, competitive intelligence, market research. We have a field force operations service set. We have data management, digital and creative, pricing support, patient access, scientific services, including medical writing, scientific event management, specialist skills like clinical trial support, compliance and legal services, and then a consulting team. We've got 300 people working in support of all the major strategic projects across the company, which, as well as doing a great job, have also helped to dramatically reduce our spend on third-party consultants. So that's the sort of breadth of things that we're doing in that group. And we use the lens of business value to prioritize between projects, not revenue and not costs. And so what that leads us to do is the things that our business colleagues most want us to do. It's the stuff that the business drives us forward. And what we do is we have a really strong model, which means that each thing that we do, I've used the word service all the way through that, it's paid for. So everything we do is paid for, and it keeps everybody honest in that transaction. We're doing things that are wanted, where we don't do things that they don't want or don't want to pay for. And that gives us an incentive to keep refreshing the things we do and the way we do them. And just to finish the story, there's the few founding principles for the way of working, which I think they don't need to be there for this type of work, but they really help. Is we have a service model, not an FTE model. Every service is designed through a gate process with a process The controls are built in. There's a price that's defined for that work. It's opt-in, so the business can choose to use it or not. Again, that keeps it very real in terms of what it is that we're doing. We are paid for the work we do, and the whole thing is geared so that we break even each year. Every service is developed with a charter colleague, a charter group within the company. So we're not building things because we think they're a good idea. We're building them because our colleagues want them. And then finally, we use a strategic delivery footprint. So 95% of our people are in 5 service centers that we have around the world. And that also means that we're playing a role that's a defined role in support of our colleagues, not instead of our colleagues. I don't know if that gives you a flavor of what we're doing, but I can go into some stories around that if you need.
Sure. No, this is a good start. This is a good start. And I saw both Philippe and Dean listening to you quite intently. So, it's your views, Philippe, as the next panelist on that topic, the genesis of revenue-centric services.
I was listening to Tim, and I read a little bit about Tim's thoughts as well. I think business partnering is essential if any shared services wants to succeed. And just coming back, to the whole concept of business intelligence, this COVID period in particular has really driven the whole need to think very differently about digital and how we manage digital. I know as an organization, we've got a lot more into data management and the importance of managing data well. It's really the DNA of what drives the business. But something else that I think is very important is business processes, right? And one thing that we're now really moving into is really the importance of being able to manage the processes end to end, right? You can master the different components of those processes, but if the dependencies are not working across those sub-processes, the whole process will just fail. So that's really something that we're really looking at. And when I talk about business processes, really you've got to start with the market. You've got to understand how does the market generate demand, all right? And that can generate demand in a few different ways. For example, it can be built around the nature of what you're offering to the market. And sometimes in our industry, we talk about products that we sell, things that we make to stock and sell to the marketplace. In other areas, and that's something I'm involved in, we talk about a solution where you need to engineer something to give to a customer, or you can talk about business services. So you've got to really understand, what are your different business models? And that's one way that's looking at it from the point of view of what you're offering to the market, but there's also how the market buys from you and how the market demands from you. And that's what we call the business segments that we're selling into. So I think really to move further in this particular area, what is really important is that we start to think more in terms of the marketplace, what are our business models, what's really driving that demand. And I think as soon as we try to think like that and orientate our thinking like that, we will quickly find that evolution accelerates.
Makes sense. Dean, what's your take on the genesis?
Well, just first comment on Tim's scope and the way they've evolved. It's fantastic. Congratulations. But it really does show, I think, the essence of what a good shared services model can do. If a lot of the organization is going to set up on a cost base. I mean, that's traditionally the old reason for doing these things. It's becoming more common now to look at value-centric propositions, even on setup, but still, as we've all said, cost is an important component of that. There's no point making a shared services model that's going to cost you a lot more than the individual components that you're pushing into one place. So for me, the genesis is going to be different for every company, and the growth path is going to be different for every company. The key thing is, as both Tim and Philip have said, is to be showing that added value and being the partner of choice in that process. Now, I think it's important. I mean, everyone said so far that you need to be have that partnership model. I think it's important to have what Tim has set up in terms of internal pricing, internal relationships that are very, very clearly laid out. I mean, I see a lot of, I mean, the journey I've been on with BPO partners, it's been interesting. The level of sophistication isn't as good as I would have anticipated in terms of constructing the contractual side and the performance side of those relationships. And you often have to add into that a lot of the things that you want to see drive performance in that relationship as well. But I think the same goes for a purely internal shared service, even if you're not using external partners. The same concept. If you treat yourselves as a commercial entity in a right to choose for the business and the supply that you're giving to that business, then it's all about value add, or it should be. Sometimes it will be price driven, and I'd say that's right. You know, if a particular business unit or a particular juncture in the strategy of the business is that cost is more important, then hey, so be it. You leverage the cost components that you can to get out of the dip that you're in. But I think overall, the business shared services model is going in the value-added direction and will continue to go that way. And I think the model that Tim's outlined is an excellent example of how a business can evolve towards a goal which is strategically critical for the business. I mean, you imagine trying to break up what Tim's developed, it would be really tough. It would cost a lot, and the expertise that you would lose and the value add you would lose in that process would be immense. Yeah. So a really good example, I think, Tim. Well done.
Well, let me just jump in, because there's some things that the genesis, if you like, the genesis is an idea that we can apply global service practices, global service management practices to business services. And actually the idea has become a way of working, which we stuck to. And I, Philip mentioned business partnering is essential. Absolutely right. I'm not going to pretend, by the way, that we took a lot of lumps to get to where we are. A lot of bumps along the road, but business partnering is essential. I would add to that also solution design or service design. But I run that team, so I would say that. But I think that there's one thing which is to understand. There's another to be able to put something ambiguous together into something that's not ambiguous. And we use, to Philip's point, we use business process as the core of that design because it gives us something to jump off. But in the scope, particularly in the commercial scope, it's not as process led as, say, finance or even the scientific disciplines that we have. And so that's also an interesting thing that we then have to figure out how to do. We think end to end, but sometimes you've actually got to break things down and just do a small part of the process to make something that hangs together. It's a really, I mean, that's it. Philip, is it really interesting to take that challenge on, of maybe being in a world where a sales guy doesn't necessarily follow process right all the time, and so it's about finding the right level to do that work at, rather than perhaps doing it at the compliance level, or the finance level.
Yeah, brilliant. In fact, as you guys were talking about it, I like some of the contrasting thoughts there, and we're going to debate some more on that. But before we get in there, let's get some definitions correct, because cost centricity, people understand broadly what cost centricity is. It's all about cost efficiency, productivity, timeliness, getting all of that stuff together. When it comes to let's say revenue centric, or you used front office, Dean, you used value centric. What we often find is there are those people who would say, hey, you know what, I generate a business intelligence report and therefore I must be revenue centric by nature. On the other side, there is a fully defined, let's call them the sales mechanics and the sales forecast team, a center of excellence, or center of expertise, which just focuses on coming up with real market intelligence, competition intelligence, which really helps the frontline salespeople or marketing people to do their jobs better. So let's get some definitions, and maybe we start with Dean, since you've been also a commercial leader. In your opinion, when we talk about revenue centricity, what does that translate into?
Well, it depends on the nature of the shared service, but as a concept, I would be looking for contribution both in the acquisition of growth, so customers at the front end. It doesn't necessarily mean that you would have a sales element to your shared service, but you could have, of course. But it would mean that whatever they did is enhancing the experience that the customer has. So you win more customers by word of mouth marketing and positive NPS and so on. So for me, whatever the organization does, it's going to have an impact on revenue. If you do it badly, you'll get a negative customer experience and you'll get a decline, you'll get an increased attrition rate. So I think the organization anyway needs to be very conscious of the fact that whatever you do, if it's touching customers directly or indirectly, it's going to have an impact on your overall revenue and growth position. The cost element of that, of course, is how well organized you are and so on. So, but the example that you use there in terms of having different teams focused on different things, it's perfectly valid, and there will be elements of more direct links to the revenue chain than other parts of the function. But I think it's really important that everybody feels valued in that contribution, and they recognize the connection between what they're doing and that overall revenue position for the business. So, we used to have, in my last shared services model, I managed the post-acquisition side, so nothing to do with sales, but all of the post-acquisition growth and sales, retention, collections, all of that, and technical support, customer support. Anything that goes wrong there has a massive impact in terms of your brand in the market, and therefore the acquisition side clearly going to start jumping up and down saying, hang on guys, if we're doing this badly, how can we sell to customers? They see these reviews, and in today's world, if you do have a consumer, even in B2B, but especially in the consumer world, it's so easy to get a brand perception from social media, and there's so many people ranking you these days, it's impossible to escape. So the connection is very direct to the revenue-centric portion of their goals, I think.
Right. So you said two things. One was the acquisition of customer process. What was the other one, Dean? Just
or post-acquisition. So revenue growth following acquisition. So that's, it's a sales-orientated position, but it's about balancing the retention, the attrition, and the targeting in the right way, so that you're building your average revenue per customer based on a very sensible targeting, data-driven analytics. Gotcha.
Philippe, what's your definition of revenue-centric?
I'd probably extend it a little bit further than what Dean has mentioned. I think there's definitely a revenue generation aspect to that. I mean, in fact, if I look at the work I currently do, I think I'm really part of that revenue generating model. We run risk analysis on solutions where we're going to submit bids and hopefully win those bids in the commercial marketplace. So we are somewhat connected to a group that's driving revenue. But if we think on a wider organizational level, where does it stop, the revenue generation process? I mean, let's think about a company that's going to hire a new leader for a particular brand of their business, right? If you hire the right guy and things go well, everything will be very successful. But if you don't hire the right guy, whose fault's that? Is that a fault of the manager who's managing that revenue cycle? Is it because you had somebody in HR services who was in charge of recruitment and they didn't do a good job in the recruitment process? So I guess what I'm trying to say here, I think the lines are becoming a little bit more blurred in terms of cost generation versus revenue generation. That's why, I like to think these days about the overall business process and the overall business cycle, and really thinking that more from an end-to-end perspective. Although I would agree that, having a specific customer focus is obviously a key element behind that.
Yep. Tim, since you're living and breathing the processes, what's your definition?
So what we use is a sort of simple test, which is what's the right thing to do for the company? Because obviously we can't do everything, and we have to make decisions about where to support and where not to support. And lots of people have got lots of ideas of things that can be done. And at the end of the day, we look at what's the right thing to do for the company based on the strategy of the organization and its constituent parts. And we use that to decide whether something should be done or not. So it's definitely not just about revenue generating work. In a company like ours, we've got a very, as I'm sure every company does, very broad stakeholder groups. So, it might be improving relationships with industry stakeholders. It might be achieving environment goals. It might be increasing access to medicines for patients in various different locations. It might be, helping to provide better access to evidence to allow the better search for new products, new medicines. All of those things would, they're not necessarily targeted at revenue, but they're operational services, or that professional services that support the operation of the business and the driving of the business forward. When we decide what to do, we don't decide based on cost. We decide based on value to the company.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Now, when we look at the value centricity versus the cost centricity, I think all of you have said both of them needs to exist. At the same time, we know that much of the content of these two areas may be polar opposite. So while there are similarities, at the same time, there could be polar opposite, right? So quite often we would talk about shared services for the rule-based, administrative and task-based activities, whereas center of expertise would be more where you'd use the institutional knowledge, the contextual knowledge, etc. In your opinion, what would be some of the compare and contrast, some of the similarities between a cost-centric approach, or some of the things that already happens in a cost-centric approach, versus what are some of the new things, whether it's services or skills that need to be developed in order to become a more value-added, revenue-centric, let's say, center of the company as well? So maybe we'll start with you, Philippe.
Well, it's a good question, Anavan. I think when we talk about skills and capabilities, there are some definite overlaps, whether we're talking about cost-centric or revenue-centric. And I think that, the first thing I've put on my list thinking about this evening really is digital and cyber skills. I think that's really coming in everywhere. The world is changing fast. COVID has been a big catalyst of change, forcing everybody into new ways of working. So whether we're talking about something that's more cost-centric oriented or revenue-centric oriented, I think, whereas in the past, maybe digital and cyber was seen as more of a specialist area, I think it's becoming more the core of the skill set that we need, whether we're driving cost-centric business or revenue-centric business, and particularly on the cost-centric side, I think that's really drive a lot of change, a lot of transformation, a lot of role changes. A few years ago, people were thinking twice about moving faster in the digital world, and I think that COVID has helped to accelerate people's thinking and for them to grasp in a much more granular way the need to really move in the modern digital way. You mentioned centers of excellence, and certainly that's something that differentiates a little bit, what's happening on the marketplace, because obviously you may be able to produce something, you may be able to even supply it in a fairly common way, but there are some nuances of the market that can vary, and that's important that knowledge exists in that center of excellence. And obviously thinking skills, how you're going to propose your business to your customers. I mean, that's all part of that DNA, the skill set that you need in the front office. And we're no different in that particular area in terms of the profiles that we would hire in those types of role versus somebody that's just, processing expenses to the extent that that's not done by a machine today. So that would be my take really on the technical side. In terms of behavioral aspects, a couple of things that really come to my mind. They're really important, really across the whole gamut of process. I think collaboration is really key. I think that, people having the right collaboration skills. And I think if I look back at our experience as an organization in terms of what worked and didn't work, I think, some of the biggest lessons that we've learned is where people were not collaborating well, whether it was a shared services center collaborating with the customer groups, and the business partners that they were supporting, or whether it was collaboration across geographic boundaries. Because in the world of shared services, having people of different cultures working together, it's really key if you want the whole chain of events to move smoothly. So collaboration would be one. And the other thing is continuous improvement. We obviously design processes and we want them to work according to their design, but let's not be the ostrich and stick our head into the ground. Mistakes will happen, right? Things will go wrong. And it's not because they go wrong that, we want to take the gun out and shoot somebody in the head, right? I mean, the thing that we do need to do is to really understand why they've gone wrong. And we need to really have a mechanism for really working on the continuous improvement of how we can get better. And actually, as part of that process, we can also learn and we can evolve as well. And I think that itself, the Chinese talk about the yin and the yang, right? So there's a threat and an opportunity for everything that we're doing. And I think, as much as things can go wrong from time to time, we need to leverage what we've learned from that in order to seize those new opportunities and those new ways that we can really drive something and just grasp an idea and run with it.
Yeah, I like that, the yin and yang, threat versus opportunity, because literally many organizations tend to become so threat focused and not look at the opportunities that it poses, that it becomes a negative sort of spiral. It goes threats versus cost all the time. So I like that. Dean, what would be your take on the compare and contrast of the cost-centric and revenue-centric skills?
Skills-wise, well, I think first of all, having a dedicated function to look at the skills of your shared services team needs is important. They often have different emphasis to the core business. And I think, especially when you get scale in a shared services model, you need to have a more dedicated talent management function that is looking particularly at the needs. And linked to what Philip was saying, I think it's important to understand, where things are failing, to say, and often it will be humans in that process. So developing the people in the right way. But also, I've been in one of the organizations I was working with previously. We implemented a whole continuous improvement mechanism. It worked very, very well, but it did identify some people that were just the wrong fit for those particular roles. So ultimately, if you have those frameworks in place, it will help you identify where the problems are and fix them. And whether that's a talent issue or a technology issue or a process issue, that's the thing. And I have to say, probably the number one area I would focus on, because it just solves so many issues, is to have a sort of independent performance management piece in the mix of your organization structure, and give them a decent remit, which allows some freedom. Of course, you've got to do the basics. You've got to look at the reports, and you've got to look at some insights from those reports and find out where things are going wrong, look at the root cause and so on. But also it's good to give them a brief that involves some experimentation, and look for the new things, and go out there and keep on the cutting edge of what could be applied, not necessarily has been done. It depends on the risk appetite of the business, of course, and how much they're willing to invest in the new stuff that can really help. But I found that probably one of the most beneficial features of a shared services model, to have this performance hub with the right-minded people that can really think outside the box, but apply that in a very practical way. It's just brilliant. It adds so much value. And I did this years ago in a bank I worked with. We created exactly that model. And after 18 months, it was the highest performing function of the entire business. I mean, the value they brought, which was tangible, measurable, was phenomenal. And they can do the same in the shared services model very easily. So that would be the main area I would put in to add value and move from cost to revenue or business centric sort of thinking. But there's a whole bunch of things in there. Also, I had a meeting yesterday with, in fact, my old boss has got a different business now, a software business. but they're purely into data science and drawing insights from data for targeted marketing. But the data science piece is phenomenal stuff you can do with it. So again, if you and considering that data drives or should be driving many of our decisions, then I think data sciences as a shared services component is a fantastic thing to be able to provide. It has so many dimensions to it, of course, and you'll get specialists in some areas, but the principles of data science are data-centric, not vertical-centric, so it can work. And I think to pick up on a point that Tim mentioned earlier as well, which is I would definitely evolve skills around the business analysis side to get the design right. Very often in the processes when you're moving, transferring processes into a shared services model, the design is the critical bit as to whether it will go well or not, and whether or not there's a need to re-engineer on the fly or before you migrate or after migration and so on. And there's a lot you can do on a sort of 80-20 rule, get some basic stuff right, move it over with some enhancements, and then work on the hard stuff later. And in fact, that's one of the things that we learned in our global model. We often tried to engineer the whole process in a shift or in an automation. So we had some core and robotic process automations in the mix as well. And the lesson we learned was don't try and do everything, but break it down into nice chunks, do the quick stuff, get it going, and then the rest of it can sort of transfer as is. And then you get your performance team working on it and you improve it dramatically. So I think the just common sense in the process of design, and that requires a certain skill set, which is more business and analytics as a concept. They tend to come from the IT side, but as long as you got those in the mix, your design side will be right as well.
You mentioned something about independent performance management. Now, do you mean like an internal audit team, or?
I wouldn't say audit. Audit's got no. I shudder when I hear audit on these things. I mean, certainly they'll be looking at what goes on, but it's more about innovation, getting the right innovation in the right way. And it's not just process, it's not just people, it's everything. It's the whole holistic mix. So you need people that can think in multiple dimensions. They've got a good experience across the board in technology, process, management, concepts, the whole bunch. And when you just put the right people in that role, oh my word, what a difference. It's just the world is a different place, because you can just throw things at them as problem solvers or innovators, or go and look at this new opportunity. I've heard this company's doing X, Y, Z. Can we do better? Just a brilliant bunch of people that are working on building the value and making things better. And if that's their sole day-to-day job, my word, what a difference they make.
Excellent. And I'll just take a couple of comments from the LinkedIn. So this is Salvatore Bertucci. He is from Baker Hughes. He says, one value generation GBS team is close enough to management to support decision-making process. Sometimes teams are located in the other part of the world. The other thing that he mentioned is key is to transform data provided in analytical, actionable information. So that's the other thing. And there's a question from Salil Dani, which I believe both Philip, you and Tim know. So I'm just going to hold on to that question because it talks about the challenges before I complete this round. But, let's...
Small world, right?
Yeah, I know. Philip, I heard you nodding quite vigorously on what Dean was saying. Now, before I go to Tim and get this round sort of wrapped up, was there any reflection or anything that you wanted to add to what Dean just said, or was that just?
I was nodding and I was smiling at the same time, maybe not showing so much, but where I'm very much with Dean. I think that obviously traditionally in shared services we'd like to master the process, right? Wanting to get it documented, get it buttoned down and mastered. But the reality of the business world is the business world's evolving. And the other thing I think that's happened over the years with shared services is because people have become so specialized in different parts of a process or a particular function, that ability to be able to have multi-skilled, multi-knowledge across different domains, I think has become a missing link really for many businesses. And I was going to call it problem solving. What we need really is a team of problem solvers or consultants who can really, take a business challenge. And I like Dean's idea that, sometimes, you need 80%, right? That's common, and it's the 20% that aggravates. And I see that often, even in the work I'm doing today, where we're approaching a particular market, and we've got to decide, well, what's the best way to deal with the marketplace, and what are the different considerations behind that? What sort of supply chain, what type of tax risks we're looking at, and it requires a breadth of knowledge across a number of different disciplines. So very much with you on that. And I think it's a great opportunity in this particular area to really bring value, definitely.
Is that 80-20 or is that 20-80? Take, in your lift and shift, take 20%, which is common across the different functions and countries, ship it, and then do the rest 80% when you're in the standard location.
I think it depends on where you're coming from. I think
exactly.
I think people often think that 80 is unique and 20 is common, where the reality often is the other way around, that it's 80% or maybe 70% that's really common. And I think people get so hooked up on the 20 or 30, it becomes an obstacle for seeing the 70. And what you really need is people that can perceive that and can say, well, let's work on the 70, and here, this team can work on that, and let's take, that few group of people, men and women, who can really add value on that 30% and really take us to the next level, and do it with speed and with experience.
Yeah, good comeback. Thanks for that, Sir Philip. Tim, what's your take on the compare and contrast of skills?
So I was thinking that there's, a lot of the skills are the same, right? So the application of discipline and a business approach to the provision of a service. There's a lot of similarities. A reliance on process, the design of an excellent service, and a service that might even delight the people that are using it. You could apply this to both sides. Talent and culture, I think you could apply it to both sides, but it's different, right? The thing that is different is obviously it's a different type of technical expertise that you've got in these services. They might be very, very, very deep technical specialists, or they may be broad problem solvers. There's the thing which is really quite different is the ability to put things in context of the business situation that they're working in, and use judgment to work out the right way to respond to that thing. And obviously, the further you go into complex territory, the more and more you need to be able to exercise that judgment. Yeah. I would say that one thing that we're quite careful to do is to not go to as far as the service organization making the decision. So the service organization can go a long way, but we don't get to the point where we make the technical decision, because if we do, then we shouldn't really be in the services organization, we should be in the business unit. So I think there's that. And then one other thing just to call out is project style, leadership and delivery, especially where things are not always clear. And actually this is like, if I could have a magic wand, I would wish for 50 such people to turn up on my door to take on those. And maybe it's the people that Dean and Philip talked about, but 50 such people to turn up and be able to handle the ambiguity and complexity that they will face every day doing this type of work, and be able to adjust on the fly. I just add on to that 80-20 thing. When I'm looking for people for our development team, I want people that can design the 80%, but I want them to have the appetite to stay with it, to embed for the 20 and to make it work. So we're not looking for strategists. We're looking for operationalists, people that care about making something that actually works in practice, because that's at the heart of solving business problems with our colleagues. I'm going to close the shutters so that I can be a bit lighter.
Yeah, the door is here.
It's getting very, very hot in here for some reason.
Sure. And while Sir Tim is getting his shutters adjusted, I'm going to read out this question that came from Salil Dani. And The question is, as GBS look to contribute towards business/revenue impact in addition to cost savings, what are some of the practical challenges, headwinds that you've seen in your experience? In particular, how can GBS look to measure the impact, institutionalize it across the organization, and also arrive at the right attribution model between GBS and the business? So maybe Philip, we start with you.
No, I would say that there's two things that are quite important. I think, first of all, you've got to look at the skill levels that you need, right? And I think we talked a bit about that already, that there are different profiles, different ways of thinking, and certainly the closer you get to the marketplace, and Tim was just alluding to that just now, the more that business judgment becomes important. And not everybody has that skill, all right? And that skill is not necessarily only existing in certain geographies. I mean, you find that all around the world, actually, in different cultures and different environments. And you've really got to find those people that have that type of skill. Then I think the second thing really is this whole notion that, you know, the business has to build the vision, all right, about where it wants to go, all right? And then you've got to be able to relay that vision to the people that are going to help you to build the model to execute. And, you know, getting that interface right between, and I think Tim was the one who said a bit earlier that, you know, sometimes salespeople are not, it's not that part of their DNA to have great processes, all right, but somebody's got to be able to translate that into something that is an effective process. And I think for me, those will be probably the two big initial challenges in being successful as we move into that area. Yeah.
Brilliant. Tim, did you get the question from Salil, or should I repeat it?
No, I think so. So it was there was a number of things in there, weren't there, about sort of pitfalls, and also there was a very specific thing about attribution of how do you know if you're doing a good job, and the attribution for value created. So I'm going to start with the attribution question. It's really simple. You don't need to do attribution for value created. We have a modest expectation. We want to support our colleagues, and success is that the business is successful. And what I would say is that our colleagues will tell us if we're successful, and they'll tell us if we're not. We do obviously have all sorts of customer satisfaction NPS scores that we operate, and that helps us analyze when maybe things aren't perfect, but fundamentally attribution doesn't come into it, and our colleagues are the ones who are running the business, and we're supporting that process. A couple of lessons learned that I just pulled out. One was every time we compromise on our way of working and our business model and our approach that we've worked out, well, not every time, but often when that happens, we run into trouble. So, for example, if we say, okay, we'll do an FTE model for this specific thing for this period, it's very, very hard to unpick it. It creates problems elsewhere in the system, or the FTEs start resigning because they're not getting the career development that they were promised when they were hired. And so we really like to keep to our model, and we're conscious, very, very conscious if we break that model, because we know that it often costs us more to fix than it does to just do it right in the first place. And then the second one is something we've developed and learned, is everything that we do and think about is about sustainability. Is this thing that we're doing and building going to work for the long term? And in particular, in our case, it's the sustainability of the team. So, are we able to scale the team to meet the demand, or is there a break on our ability to scale the team if, for some reason? And also, is the talent available to scale the team to meet the demand? And so we're always thinking about, is this thing being built for the long term, for good, not forever, but for something that's going to be sustainable beyond the initial thing that we're doing. And that has kept us from over-promising. I mean, a couple of cases we have, but if we keep thinking about scalability and deliverability and manage the paced build-up, then things work for us.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And in fact, as you guys were talking about it, when we look at the some of the challenges, let me pick on the part where you mentioned that majority of the skills that are required are kind of the same in both instances, whether it's cost-centric versus revenue-centric. And yet what we find is in so many organizations, so many shared services, so many global shared services, they are struggling even now to make that transition, to break that ceiling and get into, let's say, more revenue-centric opportunities or revenue-centric, let's say, part of the organization. Why is that? What's kind of, in your opinion, what are some of the obstacles these guys are facing versus you guys have been successful and because you had certain things work in your favor versus it's not working in their favor in their organizations? What would be your take?
So who's the question to, Annabelle?
Or any of it.
I'd like to call out training as a very important point. I remember when, I'm probably going back 5 or 6 years ago now, we were trying to decide on how best we can build, and this was specifically in finance, but it's in the other verticals as well, how we can best upskill the team members. And, you know, we identified in the marketplace some very good partners who could help us to build training modules that would progressively take people up that knowledge route, you know, to increase their skills. Because on the one side, if you really want to succeed, you need to be able to help your people understand more of the business models, you know, and there are obviously things you can do. You know, you can take them to certain events to show them, you know, how does the business work. I've even taken team members to some customer sites so they can visualize how the business actually looks like. But there's a lot of information that's out there that you can use to help people in a basic series of training. So we introduced what we call the Finance Academy, and that was a great tool to upskill people and really to take them up that value chain. So I would really say that training for me is a very important point. And just one thing that's quite interesting, I was chatting to a colleague in India a couple of weeks ago and just asking him, you know, what's been your experience in terms of staff turnover? And he said it's been pretty low. And I think one of the key success factors behind that really has been this focus on people skills and upskilling and training.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point on the training part. Dean, what's...
Well, I think just going back to the previous question as well, but it links to this. I think the ability to adapt cultures to the business partner or parts of the organizations that you're working with is very important, especially in a global model. So we used to serve 12 countries from various shared service centers. And each of those countries have their own sort of cultural values, their own way of working, their own just temperament in the job. And it's really important. You can't just demand that suddenly the business changes the way it works or the cultural values that they adopt in working relationships. So you have to create a shared service model that can adapt to the cultures and the countries that you're serving in that respect. So for me, that's a significant challenge, but also an opportunity, because when you've shown that you can do that, when you can create the relationships that give the trust that you need to then build, it moves from being just a master-slave type of cost-centric relationship to a value proposition, value-add basis, and the trust builds, and then it turns into something that Tim's got. So you've got a whole journey that you, depending on where they are in the life cycle, but I do find that the cultural connection between the parties to be probably one of the most challenging, but also the biggest opportunity. If you get that right, and this links back to what Philip was saying, you know, training, development, cultural awareness. It's not just about the skills. In fact, it's very little to do with the job skills. It's the soft skills. It's the mindset of the individual, the attitude of the people, and then the communication that you put in place between each other, but also with the rest of the organization. And there were some comments earlier about this this disconnect. If you're at quite a distance, how it's not that easy to both inform and be part of the strategic decisioning. But again, if you're leaving that to be the case, then of course you're going to be left out. You've got to drive the communications. You can't just sit there and hope. So if you're running a service center, it's about making yourself part of that decision process and making sure the data that you're providing is valued and trusted. Mm-hmm. So I think that cultural thing, supporting the right data, the right sort of team approach to fit in with the needs of the business in the right way, that's going to build the trust, and that's going to grow the business towards a more revenue-centric proposition.
Right, Tim?
I would say find a customer or a colleague that wants to work with you on something that's relatively small, that you can get your head around. So everything that we've done has been started with a charter colleague, and we've worked with them to shape that thing. I remember the first time we did field force operations, we shaped it was a 9 FTE service, and now it's hundreds of people doing that work across the world. The same with forecasting. It was all done with an original colleague that wanted to try to do something, and then we shaped it, we designed it. But every time we designed it for growth. We designed it for reuse. We designed it with one country to be reused with another, or we designed it with one business unit or one region to be reused with another. There's a lot of pragmatism in that design, especially when you're working out who you're working with and what's specific to them. But then when you go and apply it to the next one, keeping the faith with that design and applying it for a second time, but keeping the core. This is another use of 80-20, keeping the 80% the same, managing the 20% that's not, or even eliminating it as you implement, but always starting with someone that wants to work with you.
And that's ultimately the key thing, isn't it? You've got to get them to buy. And if you're going to deliver something that nobody wants, what's the point? And it goes back to the point you were making earlier about it being an optional model rather than a forced model. That's a big difference. You have to be more commercially minded in the way that you do these things, and that sort of laboratory approach, build it with the customer on the fly, make it work is a good way of doing that.
I can't pretend that the optional model, everyone's delighted with it, or that there's lots and lots of problems that come through the model that we've used. But what it does absolutely do is keep us relevant and keep the quality up and keep us pushing forward, moving forward, looking for the next thing where we can add value to the company. All I would say is just don't compromise on that. When you decide your way of working, stay with it. Our service model, if we can design something, let's say for 9 people for Germany or for a part of the business, and then another part of the business wants that thing, because of the way that we've geared it so that everything is with it, there's no cross subsidy, it's all self-funding. In theory, we can just go and do it for 5 countries if they want it, without having to worry about like annual budgeting and all sorts of other things, because we figured out the way of doing that thing. And if you think about actually a lot of what we've done has been replacing third-party spend. So when you've got a lot of third-party spend, you can internalize that cost, often for half the price. And I think for more quality, but obviously not always for more quality. But there's a lot of benefit that would then encourage people to want to do that thing with you. And over time, you build up the critical mass and scale in that thing, and you become the center of scale, not just the center of expertise.
Right, and I think that's a great point, and I'm going to come to that point again one more time. But before I do that, Steve Ackland says, "Good to see you guys." I guess some of you may know him, Steve Ackland, who's based in the UK. On the point that you mentioned, I would like to bring in an example from innovation sort of centric companies, digital companies. I know that places like Miro, Uber, even Google, they use it. they call it, the concept is called RFC, which is request for comments compared to ROI, return on investments. So what happens is anything which is less than, initial stages, POCs, which could be less than $10,000, $20,000, euros, pounds, these sort of ideas, they would take in. Let's say Tim gets an idea. Tim would send an idea on a standard sort of RFC template and would send it to Dean, to Phil, to others, and say, hey, this is what I think. And what do you guys think? What's your comment on it? And then once there is a consensus, like the way you mentioned, in Germany, if there are 9 FTEs that could be, become part of it, it would then go to the next round where it needs a certain amount of funding for the POC, right? And the moment there is a certain threshold on the number of people who have said, yes, go ahead and do it, it gets approved without necessarily an ROI kind of a process in place. Because majority of the times in shared services, we get caught in the ROI saying, you need to do this, show me the benefit first, And one of the examples they talked about was the Amazon Prime example, where it came up through an RFC, request for comment kind of a scenario. Imagine the amount of money Prime makes for Amazon. It's in billions and billions of dollars, right? And that's where, I thought I'll just share the example, the RFC versus ROI that comes in. Tim, going back to the point, let's say you are an external consultant who has been, running this thing, revenue-centric opportunities for a number of years. You've got a good few examples up your sleeve, and Phil is the person who is struggling to go beyond the cost centricity. He works in a very conventional, very sort of conservative organization in the utilities space. I'm not saying it's your current company, but I'm saying, and what would you say would be a starting point? What would you tell him where to start? Because Phil wants to make the transition to the next, to becoming a revenue-centric function as well.
So I'm going to go back to my outsourcing experience. And one of my old friends in the 90s came to work with us from, I think it was from CSC. And he said, I had this really sophisticated deal qualification sheet that I was running through these things, like so clever, lovely colors and Excel and all that stuff. And he looked at it and he said, we don't use that in where I come from. We use, is there a value proposition and can I sell it? And that's what we use in our team. And we have a third question, which is, and is it the right thing to do for the company? So is there a value proposition? Is this something that's, washes its face? Is it worth doing? And can I sell it? Is there someone that will work with me on it? Is there someone that will invest the time in letting us do that thing? The value to the company, maybe that's in the value proposition point. They're the questions that we ask. And we ask that today with the things that we do. And often things come through, they're brilliant ideas, but there's not someone that's sponsoring, not someone that's championing. And we know that we'll get into trouble with that thing in about 3 months' time when we've done the design and no one's calling for it to be implemented. And so we call it off. So if I was in with Philip saying, like, what are we going to do? What I would start with is, who do you know that has a problem that they want solving, that will trust you to go and work on it with them? And then the second thing I'd say is go and hire 3 consultants for yourself along the lines of what Dean said and get them to help you work it through. Start with process, because everything, if you get a process, everything will start to congeal around the process. You'll be able to hook everything off it and go from there. I don't know if it's a simple answer, but that's what I would do. Go through the address book. Anavan, you're on mute.
Sure. No, this is a great way to start a conversation for sure, right? And I was looking at Philip's facial expression.
I was thinking,
smile. I don't think he bought the work.
It's interesting from 2 perspectives. First of all, I'll just go back a few years and I'll fast track to today. So when I was involved in our financial setup, in fact, one of the things that we did when I was living in Poland actually is that I was talking to a colleague and I said, how can we do things a bit differently? So we came up with a principle we call Leanergy, right, which was really, how do we inculcate good ideas from the floor to do things differently? And I remember speaking to my boss at the time, and he said, what sort of budget do you need? And I said, well, give us 6 months, and here's how much it's going to cost to start this thing. Well, that's going even today, and we're talking about 6 years afterwards, and nobody ever stopped it. So it became a self-sustaining thing. And the second thing, the reason I'm smiling is that I have kids who are in their mid to late 20s, and my son is in e-commerce. And I think what you were describing in terms of how decisions get made and how ideas get brought up is very much how things are happening in the e-commerce space today. The things are moving so fast, all right? And when you think about a lot of those big companies, especially the ones that are coming out of China, things are moving so quickly, you just don't have time to do things and think about things in a conventional way. You've got to find a new way of doing things, a new way. And young people, all right, they've got the ideas, all right? And I think today, it's not so much of, just tapping on the experience of the old guys, like I'm speaking of myself particularly here, but, how do you draw on the skills of the young people that you've got in your team, and those are the guys that, they grew up with mobile phones in their hand, they grew up with all sorts of apps, and how do you unleash that talent, and how do you bring those skills and that knowledge to the forefront and just try to do things a bit differently?
Nice. And in fact, I was just thinking about the age part, and I was like, yeah, Tim started his journey in the shared services when he was still a toddler. He doesn't look more than 35 anyways.
I'm 54 on Thursday.
Oh, wow. Right. It's a nice segue to our penultimate question. You mentioned about millennials, and you mentioned about the new generation coming into the workforce. What does the future look like in a couple of sentences, each one of you?
Well, for me, I mean, with COVID, it's really changed the way we work, and I think we need to factor that into our organizational designs. There's going to be a lot more, I think, virtual working, and creating. It brings its own challenges. I mean, it adds a lot of value in some ways, but it creates some challenges you need to deal with in other ways. Obviously, apart from the technology components and the security and everything else related to that, creating a team and creating a cultural fit on a remote basis is much harder when you're fragmented than when you're consolidated. So, but these are the realities of today. So we need to work through those challenges and find ways of making them work. And virtual team building and bringing together everyone together in an emotional sense, even though they're not co-located, is going to be one of the biggest challenges. But I do see an evolution as well in remote working, and especially when you've got the expertise that's been talked about there available on a global basis. It's really good, particularly when you need different cultures to contribute to the direction of the business. It's really good to draw on that expertise from different cultures. And back to the point that was made earlier, we introduced something similar. We called it viral innovation, and we got it down to the teams, and we all over the world. And the ideas are coming from everyone. It's brilliant. And as long as you manage that on a process that takes you through the evolution with the right thinking of everybody in the business, plus obviously we use consultants as well, you get a lot of value out. And it's about just picking the right ideas. And I like the simplified way in which Tim's doing it with this 3-question approach. It works. Sometimes you can overanalyze and you go nowhere. And I'm guilty of that in the past as well. I've been there and trying to work through the spreadsheets and find the return on the investment, and you go right in circles. So you can become paralyzed by your analysis as well. So I think you've got to build in a bit more judgment and experience into these things, and harnessing that in the right way with a sensible decisioning process that allows for innovation, allows for some failure. It's really important to allow failure, and that's where our innovation cycle was, I thought, quite good, because we tried some things that we didn't think would work and they did. We tried some things that we thought would work and they didn't. And it doesn't matter. You're trying, and overall the net value proposition is always positive. So as long as you're you're incrementally adding value, it's okay to fail. If you keep doing everything wrong and keep taking the business backwards, I would argue you're doing something fundamentally wrong. But generally speaking, with the right attitude, the right people, and it's all about the people, you'll take it forward.
Brilliant. Tim.
Philip said earlier that businesses change, right? So, well, for sure, businesses change, GBSs change, business environments change, business models change, leadership changes, and what that does is it means that for sure, things are going to be different in 5 years' time, one way or the other. So when we work with this sustainability mindset, which is this thing going to live beyond this immediate context? Is it something that's needed for the long term? And when we're thinking about sustainability, there's two things that are sort of future proofing us. The first is reputation. So reputation management of the team that's doing work, especially when you're doing this sort of project style, business intimate type work, the reputation of the quality of the team and the way that they interact with their colleagues is hugely important, and it's easy to damage. So, thinking about building trust to enable us to go and do other things through having a fantastic reputation for delivery, 80/20 delivery, is a really cool thing to be building. And the second thing is, and where we're spending a lot of time, is on culture and on building a culture that will sustain well beyond the next change, whatever that next change is. And really trying to, what we're talking about is building a culture, not changing a culture, because most of the teams that we're managing they're new hires, right? More than half of my team I've hired since the start of COVID, so we've not met them. And we've come together in this environment, and we're working all over the world in support of our colleagues. And so instead of just accepting the culture that comes to us, we're driving a culture building program. And that culture building program, and touching on some of the things that Dean said, it's very much about the individual and their personal experience and practice of culture, sort of attributes within the company. And we talk about what's acceptable, what's good for us, and what's not. And as we have that conversation, we have it every month. I mean, I talk with my management team about it every month. We put everybody through culture building discussions. And over time, what that's doing is it's building a team culture which will be self-sustaining. And so, and that then is a team that can take all of the ambiguity that's thrown at them that we've been talking about through this discussion, and go from what I always say the team's job is take the ambiguity, love the problem, and turn it into something that you can see and do. And that's what we're about. I hope that answers your question.
Sure, says the oracle. Yeah. Philippe, imagine you are trying to sell to your kids why they should join the shared services in 5 years' time. What would be your take? How would you want to, what changes would you want to see?
I would focus on things that are a reality for them that I think will help sustain shared services. First of all, of course, work from anywhere. I have children today, particularly my son, who is almost 100% remote working. But I think actually hybrid will be the future. I think we will need some touch points with colleagues. And in fact, I was just in the office today and exchanging with some colleagues that, you need those touch points. So I think the hybrid model, I think, and not just because I'm thinking of my kids, but because I think it is going to propel the future. I think we need to look to the young generation, and we need to see how, businesses are evolving and ways of doing business are evolving, driven by the new skill sets of the future. And, just look at what's happening in schools, and, how COVID has propelled learning online. And the benefit of that is that you can have a teacher anywhere in the world instructing anybody in a developing country that yesterday couldn't afford to pay for that teacher, but now everything's available online. And I think the final point really is, be prepared for a bigger wave from Asia. I think, we've talked about this being the century of China, I would say the century of Asia. And I think that, the influence of Asia, not only culturally, but overall in business is on the rise. And I think that's going to bring some new and interesting transformations and some benefits as well.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. And that kind of brings us almost to the end of the program. We just have a couple of minutes more, but quickly, time for some trivia kind of a thing. Interesting books that you would recommend. So, maybe Tim, did you get your shortlist on one or two books that you want to share with people?
I did. My book it's very topical. So I met last year and then read a book by someone called Christian Marcoli. And he's a Swiss performance psychologist. And amongst others, he works with two sisters who are both gold medalists in the Winter Olympics, Michelle and Dominique Gissin. And his book is called The Melting Point. And what I like it only took me 1 hour to read. So, which is good for me, but it's got tips for operating well under high pressure. And, that's everybody on this call will have to be doing that. And one tip that really resonated with me was to manage with reserves. So to manage myself without using up all the reserves of the physical reserves and the mental reserves. So not push things so far that you're exhausted and not functioning properly. And what I've done as part of our culture program, I've built that into my management practice, and it's really paying off so far. I just feel so much more able to tackle things because I am not depleting my reserves beyond the red marker.
Brilliant. Dean, what's your favorite book that you want to share here?
Actually, I take an opposite view. I mean, I've got a whole bookshelf of business books downstairs, and I stopped reading full books quite a few years ago, actually. And the reason being, I mean, look, I learned a lot, and particularly in things like marketing, which was something I did for a living for some of the companies I've worked with, and I enjoyed getting ideas. But I did find that I prefer to use books as an idea rather than as a fundamental to follow. And I found more relevance these days in dipping into different websites rather than books per se. There's a lot more dynamic and topics that I find useful and interesting and new. And so I tend to look at more strategic stuff from sort of McKinsey and things like that, but Business Insider, these sort of sites. And then I'm a member of a whole bunch of different networks, including LinkedIn, obviously. And so you get a lot of conversation going in there. And I like to dive into the topics, often one-to-one, but certainly in closed groups as well, where you share a lot more ideas. So I've moved away from reading books, to be honest. So I couldn't really recommend anything of relevance recently because I just haven't. I read a lot of fiction. That doesn't really help, but it keeps me relaxed and helps me sleep at night. So that's my view on business books.
Brilliant, brilliant. But I think that's a good angle to pitch as well. Philippe.
I've been a great fan of Jim Collins for a number of years. I mean, I'm sure many of you read Good to Great, Great by Choice, How the Mighty Fall. The list goes on and on. But 2 or 3 years ago, I was in Brussels and a colleague of mine gave me a copy of Morten Hanson's book, Collaboration. And I'm going to call that out today because I think that is an important success factor for business today. I think people often get it wrong that the competition is inside the organization and we want to fight together, and we don't see the benefits of collaborating and working as an overall team and realizing that the competition is not inside, it's outside. Your competitors are outside, not inside. So I'm going to call out Collaboration, and it's an excellent book, one of the best I've ever read on the subject.
I'll get that one.
Brilliant, absolutely. And we're going to put the description of these books, as well as some of the websites that Dean mentioned, in the description part of this video on YouTube, but also when the podcast comes out. So this was a brilliant session. Thank you so much, Dean, Philippe, Tim. Essentially, our topic was, should GBS become revenue-centric versus the traditional approach of cost-centric? We had some great examples that got shared here. I think the answers to that question was that both of them need to exist, and they need to exist together, but they both need to exist. Revenue-centered approach has to exist as well. Dean, you mentioned about 80-20 rule. So as long as you can get the 80% of the things done and 20% you can manage. And I think, Tim, you mentioned about the being 80% operational, 20% sort of variation and the ability to manage. Phil, you did correct me on that, which is it's the 80% and not the 20%. But the bottom line is that this is extremely important to have this dual system approach, to have this both cost-centric and revenue-centric. But the most important thing, which I found from the discussion today, is you need to be brave. You need to be able to take that first step and go out and then make a dent and start your journey. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.